Now, the first step is we're going to get started with a brand new blank iOS Swift Playground. And you can call it whatever it is you want. I'm just going to call it computed properties. And I'm going to save it on my desktop. So first things first, if you've got manual run for your playground enabled, we're going to change it to automatically run because we're going to need it to refresh our values on an ongoing basis. Next, I'm going to delete this first variable and I now have a blank slate to work with. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant called pizza in inches. And this is going to be of data type integer because usually you don't get 15.5 inch pizzas. And I'm going to set it to equal just a medium-sized pizza, a 10-inch pizza. Now, I've been doing a lot of research on the Domino's website in order to figure out how many slices of pizza you get in pizzas of different sizes. So what they say is apparently if you take the size of the pizza in inches, say in this case it's 10-inch pizza, and you subtract 4 from 10, you end up with the number of slices of pizza. So the next thing I want to do is I want to create a variable called number of slices. And this, again, is going to be an integer that is equal to the number of slices we have in our pizza. So in this case, if we had a 10-inch pizza, 10 minus 4 is 6. So we have 6 slices of pizza to go around. Now, at the moment, all my properties are manually set, and these are both what's called stored properties. They just store a value, and we can then access the value. So for example, if I wanted to print number of slices, we can simply say print number of slices, and you can see that we've got the result printed down here in the debug area. Now, if you find that your Playgrounds does what mine is doing, where it says running computed properties for eternity and it doesn't actually have anything in the right hand pane or down here in the debug and it's just getting stuck and it's being really slow, a very easy fix for this is to simply go and open up the right hand pane over here and go into the file inspector here, this one, and change the playground settings from iOS to macOS. Now at this point it'll tell you that UIKit doesn't exist for macOS because it's an iOS specific module. So you can simply change it to Foundation, and the Foundation module contains all of Swift. So that allows us to test out our code and run our playgrounds without having it hanging forever. This is a bug that Apple has created and they've been trying to fix it for months and months, but I'm still not seeing a lot of improvements. So that's just a neat trick if this happens to you. So let's get back on track. So at the moment, our number of slices is a stored property. And in order to change it, we have to tap into it manually and update it. Say now it's 4 slices, right? But that's not really what we want. We actually want it to be computed or calculated depending on the pizza in inches. So for example, if I bought a pizza that is a 14-inch, right, say a large pizza instead, I want this to automatically update to 10 slices. So how can I do that? Well, we can use computed properties to compute the value of this property on the go as its dependents change. So instead of having an equal sign and a value, I'm going to delete that and I'm going to open a set of curly braces. And this allows me to put in some code inside that block to calculate what the value of number of slices should be. So in this case, number of slices should equal pizza in inches minus 4. And in order to give the value back to this property, we have to use a return. So you can see that this is almost like a function that calculates what the value of this property should be. Now, there's a couple of things to note when you're using computed properties. Firstly is that it has to be a var, it has to be a variable, because if you have a constant, then its value can't change and it doesn't make sense for it to be a computed property. Now, the second rule is that you have to specify a data type explicitly in order to use computed properties. You can't let Swift infer the data type because it will get very confused when it's trying to calculate what the value should be. So to make it simpler and more explicit, we always specify the data type when we're using computed properties. So now you can see that as I change this value, let's say we bought a small pizza instead, then the value of number of slices updates dynamically without me having to go into it and manually change it. So you can see if we had a lot of properties that were dependent on other properties, say things such as an area that's dependent on the width and the height, or something like volume, then we can use computed properties to save ourselves a lot of work and potentially a lot of errors as well. Now, what we've got here is actually more specifically a getter, because inside this block of code, we're specifying the computation that should happen when you try to get the value of this property. And we're doing that when we're trying to print it or if we're trying to work with it. Say, for example, if I wanted to create a new constant called a, and it was equal to the number of slices times 2. At this point, we're trying to get the value of number of slices. So at this point, we will tap into our getter. And also at this point, when we're trying to print it, we will also tap into the getter. So the getter is the code here that will run in order to get us the value of this property. Now, some of you might have realized that even if we didn't have computed properties, we could just as easily have created a function, say called calc pizza slices, and this function does something very simple where it simply says the number of slices is equal to pizza in inches minus 4. And this is now just a bog standard stored property, and the number of slices can now be worked out by calling calc pizza slices. So this also works, of course, and that's what we've been doing so far because we haven't yet learned about computed properties. But you can see, firstly, it introduces a lot more lines of code, and so that means potential sources of error and places where things can go wrong. So whenever you find yourself creating methods that don't have an input and don't have an output, and all it does is execute a block of code, then consider whether if you can instead use a computed property to do exactly the same thing without the need for creating an extra method. Now, what we've got here in between these two curly braces is a block of code that programmers will call a getter, because what it does is it will execute the code in order to get the value of this property. So this is in fact a short version of the getter. And if you wanted to write it out completely, then you would write it like this. So inside a set of curly braces, that has the get keyword in front of it, we specify the code that will run when another piece of code is trying to get the value of number of slices.